The night Seraphina Vale was thrown out of the Ironblood kingdom, it was raining. She stood in the great hall with wet hair and dry eyes, because she had made herself a promise on the walk from her chambers to the throne room. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of these people who had chosen a comfortable lie over an uncomfortable truth. King Dakon sat on his throne like he always did, with perfect stillness and a jaw carved from stone. He did not look at her when the charges were read. He looked at a point somewhere above her head, as if she were already gone. Treason. That was the word they used. Seraphina had conspired with an enemy pack, they said. She had betrayed the kingdom's secrets, they said. And the child growing inside her, barely 3 months along, did not belong to the king. Every single word was a lie. She knew it. The small group of council members who had manufactured the evidence knew it. And somewhere deep behind those cold eyes, Dakon knew it too. She could see it in the way his hands gripped the armrests of his throne, too tight, knuckles pale. A man who truly believed the charges against his queen would not be gripping the armrests of his throne. He would be burning with rage. Dakon looked like a man holding himself together through sheer force of will, the way a person does when they are doing something that quietly destroys them. She wanted to say his name, just once, just to make him look at her. She said it, quietly. Dakon. He did not look at her. The decree was read. Banishment. Permanent. She was stripped of her title, her place, her bond to the pack. She was escorted out before the morning came. No belongings beyond what she wore. No goodbyes. The heavy doors of the palace closed behind her with a sound like the end of something. She walked into the rain. She did not look back. That was the second promise she made herself that night. She kept both of them. 7 years is a long time to rebuild a life from nothing. Seraphina settled in a small city far from the Ironblood borders, in a place where no one knew her name or her history. She found work as a healer, tending to women in labor, learning the particular quiet that lives in rooms where new life enters the world. People trusted her quickly. She had steady hands and a calm voice, and she never panicked, even when everything was going wrong. She raised her son alone. Calum came into the world 3 months after the banishment, in a rented room with a midwife Seraphina had befriended. He was small and furious, and perfectly healthy. She held him against her chest in the hours after his birth, and felt something rearrange inside her permanently. This was what she had left. This was enough. She would make it enough. He grew fast, faster than other children. By age 4 he could lift things a 7-year-old would struggle with. By age 5 he had an instinct for danger that made the hair on the back of Seraphina's neck stand up. Once, at a market, a man grabbed her wrist too roughly, a stranger who had mistaken her quiet manner for weakness. Calum stepped between them without hesitation. He was 5 years old. He looked up at the man and said nothing. He simply looked at him, and the man let go and walked away. Seraphina bought them both a sweet roll after that, and didn't speak about what had happened, because she didn't have the words. Calum had his father's eyes. She had known it from the moment he was born, and she had spent 7 years making peace with that fact. He had the same directness in his gaze, the same absolute stillness when he was thinking, the same way of entering a room as if he had already decided what would happen in it. She loved him completely, and sometimes, in the very early mornings before he woke, she sat in the kitchen with her tea and felt the old grief move through her like water through stone. She was not broken. She was just a person who carried something heavy and had learned to carry it without making noise. On a Tuesday in early autumn, a letter arrived. It came from a woman named Petra, who had once been a handmaiden in the Ironblood court, and who had loved Seraphina enough to stay in quiet contact over the years, sending notes through a complicated chain of trusted people. Most of Petra's letters were small things, news about people they both knew, careful observations about life inside the kingdom. This letter was one sentence. The sacred trial has been called. Any blood heir may present themselves. The crown is listening. Seraphina read it 3 times. She set it down on the kitchen table. She picked it up again. She looked at it for a long time. The sacred trial was the oldest tradition in Ironblood law. It could not be called by any king or council. It was called by the crown itself, a phenomenon that happened when the royal line was in question, when something had gone wrong in the succession that the ancient laws needed to correct. When the trial was called, Any person with legitimate royal blood could step forward and let the sacred stone decide. The sacred stone did not lie. That was the thing about it. That had always been the thing about it. Serafina looked at Calem's wrist. The mark had been growing there for the past several months, a pattern in his skin that darkened slightly each week, something she had been watching with a combination of dread and inevitability. She had known, in the way mothers sometimes know things, without being able to explain the knowing, that this moment was coming. She had simply hoped she would have more time. She folded the letter, put it in her coat pocket, made dinner. That night, after Calem was asleep, she sat in the dark and thought about everything she stood to lose, and everything he stood to gain, and what kind of mother she wanted to be. In the morning, she told him they were going on a journey to claim what was his by right. He looked at her for a moment, considering, and then nodded as if this were completely reasonable. She had raised him to take serious things seriously, without falling apart. He was 7 years old, and he was more composed than most adults she knew. They left 2 days later. The Ironblood territory recognized her, before she recognized it. She felt the faint hum of the old pack bond the moment they crossed the border, a ghost of something that had been severed, but not fully erased, like a scar that still knew what the wound had been. She kept her face calm and her pace steady, and she held Calem's hand in hers. They did not make it far before they were stopped. 6 guards in Ironblood colors appeared on the road ahead, and behind them, in a black carriage that had pulled out of the tree line, was a woman Serafina recognized immediately. Lady Mira Ashvale had barely changed in 7 years. She was still beautiful in the sharp, deliberate way of someone who treated beauty as a weapon. She looked at Serafina from the carriage window with an expression that was working very hard to seem calm. "You are violating the terms of your banishment," Mira said, her voice carrying across the road with practiced authority. "Turn around." Serafina said nothing. She looked at the guards. Calem let go of his mother's hand. He took 1 step forward. He raised his left wrist. The mark was fully visible in the daylight. It moved the way fire moves, not burning, but alive, recognizing something in this territory that made it respond. The horses pulling Mira's carriage shied back sharply. 2 of the 6 guards dropped to one knee before they seemed to realize they were doing it, their bodies responding to a signal older than their training, older than any order they had ever been given. Mira's composure fractured for just a moment, only a moment, but Serafina saw it. She saw the exact moment Mira understood that everything was over. They were escorted to the palace, not as prisoners, not as guests, but as something the kingdom's legal framework had no category for, which was the rightful heir, and the woman the king had wronged, arriving to let the truth take its natural course. The throne room was exactly as she remembered. Serafina had spent 7 years telling herself it would feel smaller when she saw it again. It did not feel smaller, but it felt different. She felt different inside it. She was not the young woman who had stood here in the rain 7 years ago, silent with shock, watching the man she loved choose something easier than her. She was someone who had survived that, someone who had built a life in the rubble and raised a child who could silence a grown man with a look. She was not afraid of this room anymore. Dakon was on the throne. He was older, not in the way that diminished him, but in the way that comes from carrying something heavy for a long time. There were lines on his face that had not been there before. He held himself with the same perfect stillness, but she could see, because she had once known him better than she had known herself, that something in him was held together by an effort that did not used to be necessary. He had not taken a queen. Petra's letters had mentioned it occasionally, carefully, as though she was not sure Serafina wanted to know. He had ruled alone for 7 years. She had thought about that more than she wanted to admit. His eyes found her first. She watched him absorb the sight of her, the way a person absorbs a blow they were prepared for, but which still lands hard. His jaw tightened. His hands were still. He held her gaze for a moment that contained 7 years of everything that had happened between them and everything that hadn't. Then Calem stepped forward, and Dakon's eyes moved to him. She had imagined this moment many times, mostly late at night, when her defenses were low. She had imagined Dakon seeing his son and feeling nothing, or feeling guilt that he quickly buried, or performing shock he did not truly feel. She had not imagined this. She had not imagined the way the color left his face, or the way his hands finally, after all his careful stillness, simply released their grip on the armrests of the throne. Calum looked at his father the way he looked at everything that required his serious attention, clearly, directly, without flinching. "I am here for the trial," Calum said. His voice was steady for a 7-year-old. It was steadier than the room. "My blood is my claim. The crown will confirm what you refuse to." No one in the throne room breathed. Dakon did not speak for a long moment. When he did, his voice was controlled in the way of a person who is using control as a shield. He said 2 words. "Prepare it." The trial chamber was beneath the palace, carved from stone older than the kingdom itself. The pack elders stood in a ring around the sacred stone, which sat in the center of the room on a raised platform, dark and quiet, waiting. Mira had spent the hours since their arrival attempting to prevent this moment through legal objections, procedural arguments, and the kind of frantic political maneuvering that looks like confidence but smells like fear. The elders had heard her out, and then proceeded anyway. The blood mark had been witnessed on the road by 6 guards and a noblewoman. There was no legal foundation for refusal. The chamber filled in silence. Serafina stood at the edge of the room. She kept her breathing even. She had survived the last 7 years one day at a time, one quiet decision at a time, and she could survive this the same way. She watched her son walk toward the stone with the unhurried confidence of a child who had been told his whole life, not in words but in the way she had raised him, that he had the right to take up space in the world. He stopped in front of the stone. He looked at it. Then he pressed his palm against its surface. The light came immediately. It rose from the stone like something that had been waiting a long time to be released, filling the chamber from floor to ceiling, white and gold and warm, and with it came a sound that was not quite a sound, more a frequency, something felt in the chest and behind the eyes, something that bypassed the ears entirely and went directly to whatever part of a person recognizes truth. The elders knelt, every one of them, without discussion, simply went down. The guards at the door knelt. The attendants along the walls knelt. It was not a performance. It was not obedience to any authority in the room. It was a physical response to something ancient and undeniable, the way the body responds to a sudden drop in temperature or a flash of bright light, without asking permission from the mind first. Serafina did not kneel. She stood where she was and let herself feel it, the complete, final, devastating rightness of the truth, being told by something that could not lie. Dakon stood at the far end of the chamber. He did not kneel either. He stood very still and looked at his son, bathed in the light of the stone, and something moved across his face that she had not seen there in 7 years. Something unguarded, something that looked like grief and recognition, and a reckoning all arriving at the same moment. The light faded slowly. The stone went quiet. Calum lifted his hand from its surface and turned to look at his mother, and she gave him the smallest nod, the kind that said, "I see you, and I am proud of you, and you are always exactly who you are." Mira's carefully constructed world came apart in the hours that followed. An elder named Calloway, who had kept his suspicions quietly for 7 years, in the cowardly way of men who knew something was wrong, but chose the safer path of silence, finally produced the documentation he had held back at the time of the original trial. It was enough. The council convened. Mira was taken from the palace before nightfall, to face a tribunal she had spent 7 years believing would never exist. She did not go quietly, but she went. The throne room was nearly empty when Dakon came to find Serafina. She had not left. She had not been sure where to go, and some part of her had known this conversation had to happen, that it was the one thing still unresolved in a day that had resolved almost everything else. He walked toward her across the long floor of the throne room, and she stood exactly where she was, because she was done moving for him. If he had something to say, he could come to her. He stopped a few feet away. He looked at her the way a person looks at something they have spent a long time trying not to think about, and then cannot stop seeing. "I was wrong," he said. "Not I was deceived, not I was manipulated by people I trusted." Just those 3 words, plain and undecorated, with nothing attached to them to soften the weight of what they meant. She looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said. It was not forgiveness. She was not ready to forgive him, and she was not going to perform forgiveness for the comfort of a room that had wronged her. But it was an acknowledgement that he had finally said the true thing, and that it had cost him something to say it, and that she had heard it. He turned to Calum, who was standing a short distance away, watching his father with that careful, measuring gaze that Seraphina had spent 7 years watching and recognizing. Dakon knelt. The Alpha King of the Ironblood Kingdom went down on one knee before his 7-year-old son, in the empty throne room, with no audience to perform for, and no political calculation behind the gesture. It was simply what was owed. Calum looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at his mother. Then he placed his small hand on his father's shoulder, briefly, the way you touch something real to confirm that it is actually there. Across the room, on its plinth behind the throne, the sacred crown moved. It lifted, just slightly, just enough to be seen. It did not descend. It was not ready to crown anyone tonight. But it moved, and everyone in the room understood what the movement meant. The heir had been named. The truth had been witnessed. What had been built on a lie had been taken apart in a single afternoon. Seraphina looked at her son standing in the place where he had always belonged, in the kingdom that had tried to erase him before he was born, in front of the father who had finally done the only decent thing left to do. She had walked out of this palace in the rain 7 years ago, with nothing except the child no one believed was his. She had walked back in with the one thing that could not be hidden, denied, or taken from her. The truth had always been patient. It had simply been waiting for the right moment to speak for itself.